Hello everyone, my name is Bhavesh Chakur and today's my video topic is the difference between functional programming and object-oriented programming. A programming pattern is a way or style of a programming, and and every programming pattern has its own advantage and disadvantage. So it is necessary to understand the which programming pattern should be used where. Now let's see the difference between the function programming and the object oriented programming. So the first point of difference is the definition. The functional programming mainly focuses on the evaluation of a functions, and the object oriented programming mainly focuses on the concept of a object. The functional programming means it uses the function, that is the method, to perform its task, whereas this object oriented programming, the every attribute, every data or is treated as an object. Then second point of difference is the data handling. In functional programming, the immutable data can be used easily, and in object oriented programming it only works on the mutable data. So if your code is written in such a way that it has some immutable data and it is not changing frequently, then functional programming should be used. Whereas in this object-oriented programming, the mutable, the variable whose values are going to be changed more frequently, more oftenly, than object-oriented programming is best for it. And then the third difference is the support. The functional programming supports the parallel programming, whereas this object-oriented programming does not support the parallel programming. There are few parts in this object-oriented programming that supports the that come closest to the parallel programming, but in the aspect of the comparison between this functional and this the functional programming, parallel programming are way more efficient than object oriented. Then the next difference is the execution order. So in the functional programming, the execution of code can be in any order. It is decided by the JVM. Let's say if the line number two's code is referring to the line number 10, then line number 10's code is referring to the another section of this code, and so on. Then that code will be executed in that order. Whereas in this object oriented programming, there has to have some type of order in the programming execution. Then the next difference is the iteration. In functional programming, it uses the recursion for the iterations, and in object oriented programming, it uses the loops. So in the comparison between the recursion and loops, the loops are more easier to understand and more easy to imagine, whereas this recursion is a bit of a difficult to even imagine, and even to control the flow of this recursion type of loops. Then the next difference is the elements. So the basic elements which is present in the functional programming is a variable and functions. The variable means the variable which are the data actually we are passing to the function, and the variable which are receiving from the function, and the actual function which is working that task are the basic elements of this functional programming. Whereas this in the object oriented programming, the basic elements are object and method. So yeah, in this object oriented programming, every attribute is treated as an object. So this object and the method which are using that objects are basic elements of the object oriented programming. The next difference is the which is a better in the perspective of the learning. So in the learning perspective, the functional programming is way easier than object oriented programming, because the object oriented programming contains way more concepts like the method overloading, method overridings, and the abstraction, encapsulation, inheritance concept, which are more complex than the functional programming. Then the main difference is the use of the functional and object oriented programming. This functional programming should be used where there are few things, and you have to perform the more operation on that, where you have to perform the more operations. So in this so at that time, the functional programming should be used. Whereas this object oriented programming should be used where there are many things but you are performing very few operations on that thing. Then the next difference the now let's see the various other cons of functional programming and object oriented programming. So the problem with the disadvantage or problem with this functional programming is it requires a very different mindset, because the functional programming is bit of a difficult than the object oriented programming. Then the cons or the disadvantage of object oriented programming is uh, it does not allow the code reusability. Means the code is reusable, but sometimes the code is written in such a way that it is suitable for that particular class only. If we use that code in the different class, then it is not supported by the class, or its functions or methods are not in order to execute that task. So in the conclusion, it is up to the programmer or developer to which function which programming pattern should he choose, and which is suitable for him in the aspects of the simplicity and the productivity. And that's it with the difference between functional programming and object oriented programming. Thank you.